And what we're going to do this evening, we're going to do a couple of things before the halftime break. So first of all, give you an opportunity to give some feedback on the activities that that we set you. Don't worry if you didn't do them, but this is an opportunity for those that did to raise any queries that they had specifically about those things. And then the second part of the pre-break half is using the online system. So how you go about finding your way around the website, particularly thinking about how you map routes online, transect routes, and also how you enter data, the all-important bird records that you collect. Then we'll have a short break. In the second half, it'll probably actually be more like the last sort of 30 minutes or so. So I think we'll have a bit more to get through in the first half than we do in the second part. But we'll start with a few tips to help improve your ID, because if you went out and did that point count and found it quite tough, then that's all very well, but how are you going to improve your bird song and bird call recognition? So a few tips around that and things you might want to go and try, again with a couple of demonstrations of things that we've found quite useful. And then finally there'll be a kind of another opportunity to ask more general questions around the breeding bird survey and the things we've been talking about. So at that point, those of you that are sort of good to go can go and go and map your route or whatever you want. And those who've got additional questions they want to ask, that'll be an opportunity to do that. So without further ado then, let us launch into the first bit, which is kind of feedback on those few activities, practical exercises that we threw your way. The first of which was estimating distance. So if you had a go at that, how did you find it? And you should be able to see a quick poll now. If you didn't have a chance to try or weren't sure what we were on about, this is or it may be something you need to wait till after lockdown if you haven't got enough space where you are. The idea was to identify an object that you think is about 25 meters away from you, then surreptitiously measure those 25 meters either by striding over there or checking on Google, or if you're not embarrassed about such things, by getting out a big tape measure and measuring it on the ground there. So this looks pretty good. So just to give you an indication, around half of you got it about right. That's brilliant. So when you're doing your BBS, you've got a pretty good idea of what's 25 meters away from you. That's really good. That's your close distance band marked out. 3 or 4 of you either underestimated or overestimated. Don't worry too much about that, because when we come to look at the maps in the online system in a little while, hopefully you'll see that there are some really handy tools which can actually allow you to, once you start to get to know your square, once you start to go there and record the habitat and start finding out, seeing what the route looks like on the ground, you can use those online maps to actually identify where some actual features that are 25 meters away from you. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a little while. So that's quite encouraging. The thing I think we all find most difficult when it comes to estimating distances, it's all very well when you've got a clear line of sight, but if you are in a wooded area and a bird is singing and you cannot see 25 meters into that wood, and you certainly can't see 100 meters into that wood, how do you know? And again, I will touch on that a little bit more when we're looking at an actual square, because I think it's a bit easier to visualize then. And it's a combination of kind of using your experience of how loud different species vocalize. A wren is a really loud singing species. So actually, if one's within 25 meters of you, it's pretty deafening. Whereas if it's, but you can still hear it if it's more than 25 meters away. Whereas a goldcrest or a tree creeper, chances are if it's more than 25 meters away, you're going to be struggling to hear it in the first place. So if you hear a Goldcrest singer, you can be pretty sure it's within 25 meters. But I will say a bit more about that when we're looking at the maps. So that's that was the first activity, estimating distance. Well worth doing. You know, if you didn't get around to doing it or you didn't have a chance to do it, do have a go. If you want to have a go at the 100-meter one, it's going to be a bit more difficult to actually measure it out with a tape measure, but you can, again, go online, work out what 100 meters looks like using some features on a Google map, and then go outside and say, okay, when I checked on it, I know that that's 100 meters away, and see what 100 meters looks like. And again, it's worth saying that it will depend on the habitat, you know, your line of sight, how easy it is to find something that's 100 meters away. So something to bear in mind if you're going out to practice this. 100 meters is might feel different in an open habitat compared to, say, a suburban habitat, you know, when you're looking down the road to the bus stop or whatever. Okay, part two, or the second activity for homework, was all about the habitat recording. So rather than go through all this again, because we had a quick look at this, we looked at a few photographs last week, and then I highlighted for you the resources that are available online. And again, I will show you, we'll actually be looking at the website a little bit later on, so you will flag up where those are again. But rather than running through all that again, what I'd rather do is, if you had a go at this, or you have any specific questions about this, if you can use the raise the hand button, or even just wave at the camera, and then I'll give you an opportunity to ask your question specifically about habitat recording. So if you had any queries about that, and we'll do our best to address those. Okay, so Lynette, I think those first.
Yes, I completed the habitat recording for the first transect.
Brill.
For my square. I found it quite straightforward, actually. There was an interesting mix of habitats, and I suppose you call them sub-habitats on all the levels and so on. I didn't find that, I think I find the bird one a bit more problematic, but that's mainly because the site of the transect, the second transect, that kind of very usefully, Nick helped me with it, Nick Mariner, and went up. Well, unfortunately, it's too steep a hill, so you can't actually pause and even assess I couldn't assess the distance of 25, 50, 100 at all, because it was very foresty and it was so steep that all I could do was focus on leaning forward with my head and just brutally just marching up before I fell over.
It sounds like a tough transect with that. But in terms of the actual habitat recording, you were comfortable with that, were you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
good. Well, can we come back to, we'll come back to the second part about how you go about recording the birds and any challenges there in a moment. But I just want to pick up on a question from Richard in the chat there, who asks, can you discuss people disturbance, as this can be relative to the time of day, or which day of the week it is. It might be more during the weekend if it's a place that gets lots of visitors, for example. So this is one of the I think it's without looking at it, I think it's a level 4. It's quite a long way down the sort of pecking order of levels of certain habitat types, the amount of disturbance. The key message is to assess that based on the likely time of your survey. And I realize if you start at 6 but don't finish till 8, the level of disturbance may have increased somewhat, but try and pick a representative midpoint of the sort of time of day that you survey. So if it's really busy, if the place you go to is pretty quiet in the morning but then fills up with visitors in the middle of the day, well, that doesn't matter, because you're surveying it when there is relatively low disturbance. So I think that's probably the starting point. If you know, though, that the level of disturbance how best to explain this. The kind of average level of disturbance is a lot higher than what it is when you're there. Then you should try and account for that when you're assessing disturbance. So if you can tell, you know, if there's litter everywhere and the path is really, really worn, and you don't see anybody when you're there, but you know, you can tell it gets a lot of visitors, then yes, that should be that would be a higher level of disturbance than the actual time you're assessing. So it's a combination of what it's like when you're there, but also any indications of or your background knowledge of the site. You don't have to keep going back you don't have to go at 12 o'clock on a Monday and 12 o'clock on a Saturday and do this in a lot of detail. You just need to combination of what you observe when you're there and any other clues to the level of disturbance it might be getting. Similar probably applies to some of the grazing, level of grazing. So with things like with the mammals that graze, even if they're not visible at the time, or they're not in the that section at the time you're doing your habitat recording, there's often indications of the level of grazing just based on the state of the vegetation. So any other questions on habitat recording? If we go to Jeremy.
So
sorry, Jack, we'll come back to you in a minute. It seems to be a bit of audio interference there. Jeremy, fire away.
Yeah, my question was about grassland. So my practice patch, my practice transect, walked along the side of a large village green, bounded by so on my right hand side is a large village green. On the left hand side is a paddock which has got grass in. The horses aren't currently there, and I had to think. It was really good to do because it made me think a lot actually about how you describe those habitats. But I'd like to hear how you would describe them, or I can say what I came up with. I hadn't really thought about it before, actually.
I think it's probably best because I've got a picture in my head now of sort of bucolic scene with a nice big village green on one side and the grazing paddock on the other. But it's probably best if you say what you recorded it as, because you'll have a better idea of the overall context.
So I decided that my best guess was that the village green was suburban or rural. I am right on the edge of suburbia, but the key bit being that I then decided it was municipal parks or grass was the key thing, and then the farmland. So and then the paddock I thought was farmland. But actually, one of the other questions was, can someone explain to me what the difference is between improved grassland and unimproved grassland? That then became easy for me because it was farmland with a small hedgerow, and level 4 would be horses because it's grazed by horses in the summer. So
that's really good, Jeremy. And my the first thing to say is it sounds like you've got that spot on, certainly with the first level, the human site, and the other first level choice of farmland. Those make perfect sense for the things that you had either side of you. And yeah, it sounds like you had to make a value judgment between suburban and rural. And yeah, I would go with whatever you said on that. It sounds because just how close it is, and it might even change as you go along the transect, because the first 200 meters might really be surrounded by countryside, and then you get further into the village, or vice versa.
That's exactly the case, but I didn't sort of go into that detail. Precisely so.
Really good question about improved grassland versus unimproved, and this comes down to the tussocky-ness. If you look into a field and see chunks of nettles and maybe juncus, tufty bits like that, that is typically a sign of unimproved grassland. So it hasn't been been treated with herbicides. It hasn't been sort of scarified or harrowed and then seeded. If you've got a more uniform grass and it's quite, and it, you know, these kind of rich grass grazing meadows, I've got one in my mind now, it's quite difficult to describe, but you know, mostly grasses, and it looks really lush, and there aren't other things in there, whether that is close cropped or tall, then you would you class that as improved grassland. So that's really the difference. Does that make sense?
Thank you very much. But yes,
does it make sense for the one that do you now think, yeah, I'm pretty sure that was improved or unimproved?
Well, I decided it was most likely improved, but by the horses, by the fact that it was grazed. I guess that counts.
Yeah, it is difficult, but given by what you said about where you were in relation to the village as well, I suspect it's more likely to be improved. You know, that will have been seeded at some point, or they may have taken the weeds out, specific things that poisonous to horses, or the horses won't eat. So yeah, improved sounds like a good bet for that.
So unimproved is really what you call rough grassland, sort of moorland type grass, heathland.
Moorland is, yeah, the kind of stuff you get on the edge of moorland is a good example. It doesn't have to be at the edge of moorland to be unimproved grassland, but it's that kind of thing with those rough areas, patches of juncus, patches of nettle, that kind of thing. Jack.
Can you hear me okay? Because I think that's a volume problem.
There's a lot of feedback, but as long as it's just you, I think we'll be okay for a moment. So fire away, and then okay. I'll try to answer.
One of my transects seem to have three distinct terrains overlaying one another. The first 8 meters were dominated by a ditch or a small stream of running water. Behind that was a large conifer hedge with several trees. And then beyond that was grassland. So how would I classify that?
Okay, so let me just recap, Jack. I've just muted you so that the audio is better. What Jack's faced with is basically 3 habitat types. There's a stream and a ditch close to him. There's a patch of conifers, and then beyond that, there's open grassland. So first of all, my point would be, don't worry about it too much. You've got to pick 2, and it doesn't matter, to some extent, it doesn't matter which one you leave out. The second point is, you want to really be trying to, if you possibly can, choose the 2 that you think are most dominant on that 200-meter section. So in terms of the area that you're surveying, so if you think about your 100-meter distance band and think roughly what proportion of that is occupied by the ditch habitat, for example, the water habitat versus the woodland versus the open grassland, and you might come to a conclusion that actually the 2 dominant habitats within the area I'm surveying are the woodland habitat, the conifer woodland habitat, and the open grassland habitat. It's difficult to know without going there, but that would be my feeling, trying to make a judgment on what are the ones that are that occupy most of the area that you're surveying. But yeah, we appreciate, we know it can be difficult when you've got multiple things, so it is ultimately a case of picking what you think are the top 2.
Lynette, did you have a question as well? So, yeah.
Just a quick one. Some of the grassland that I noticed that I thought was improved grassland, I didn't realise till later on, right at the end of the transect, how many cows and horses there were around. Are you allowed to retrospectively just say, actually, this is obviously grazing? Has it been improved by grazing? Because there's so many similar fields that are being improved by cattle and sheep sort of 100 or 200 meters away.
Yeah, so I think the message there is when you if you can make a visit to do the habitat before you do the bird survey. Don't make your first visit habitat, a recce and a habitat recording and a bird visit because it'll get confusing. But don't feel like what you say about the first transect is completely set in stone the minute you say it. So if you go round and actually you look back at what you said for the first one and think, well, actually I've learned something further, 600 meters down the line, which informs me about the first one. Yeah, just modify it so that the key thing is that you're being consistent. So if you realize actually with hindsight that field was improved, yeah, just change it in the form. It's not going to go, it's only when you submit it online or send the form off that information is finalized. So you can edit it as you go around and as you find more information out. So yeah, good question, but I think you're fine to do that. Okay, anything else on habitat before we move on to the birds? Dean.
Hello, matey. So I did my habitat last year. Do I just have like a walkthrough of my transects and be happy with what it is? And if it is what it is, then it stays the same, just looking for any obvious things, or do I do the whole thing again?
You're absolutely fine to, just to walk through it and just double check that nothing's changed. Once you get pretty familiar with your square, you don't need to do a habitat visit every year. So when I do I have many times, I think I've done my BBS square, this will be 10 or 11 years now. I just make a note as I'm doing my bird visits. I know I told you not to do this, but if you're familiar with your square and you've done it enough times, you'll know, hang on a minute, there used to be a block of woodland there. Scribble it down as you're going around, that block felled or whatever, and then you can update your habitat later. But if you did your habitat last year, a quick walk round before you do the bird survey this year would make sense.
Yeah, just I guess I'm similar to you, Nick, and I know my site, so I know what's different, but it's worth, particularly in arable areas where the cropping changes. So it may well be this on a rotation. So it may be fallow this year, but next year it's got, say, an autumn crop and then it's got a spring after. So some of that crop rotation, it's worth keeping an eye on, because that if you're in a largely arable area, which I guess quite a few of you will be, that could well change on an annual basis.
Yeah, good point. Good point about arable.
Tessa's got her hand up as well, Nick.
I've got a path and it's got wood. It's got like a high hedge on either side. Beyond that is an arable field one side and unimproved pasture the other side. So of the birds, the nearest birds are going to be in the trees and bushes. So what do I just put it as woodland? It isn't a wood because it's a trackway with with a tall hedge on either side.
Good question. And because I don't know my my habitats that well, I know what I'm doing now is I'm looking at the second page of the habitat recording form. Desperately, so we've got in the semi-natural grassland, you've got some level 3 options, which are hedgerows with trees, for example. If it's more than a hedgerow with, if it's more than a hedgerow with trees, then you might be looking at. I'm looking also at scrubland.
But that's a level 3, isn't it? The hedgerow with tree.
Yes, you're right. So if so are you saying?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I was just confused because I was just looking. I haven't written anything down.
Just describe it again, Tessa.
It's a trackway and it's a sort of cycle track, that people cycle along. So it's a sort of one of these deep walks through the Chilterns with banks on each side with big tall trees on them. Not the sort you get in a wood, but 50 foot or something. And then bushes, but just beyond it, it's just like one tree thick. one side you've got an arable field, and the other side, which is near a farm, is just some grotty pasture, unimproved looking.
So it does sound. I've got a picture now of the kind of. I know what you mean. It's like almost like an old railway line or that kind of
Well,
thing.
yes, it's one of these ancient trackways, I suppose.
So it sounds like the sides of those sound like they're probably going to be closest to scrubland, given the sort of thing that, so that says includes young woodland less than 5 meters tall. You've got the option to say broadleaf, mixed. So, and there's also downland in there as well. So scrubland, without looking at the transect, that might be one though that's worth considering for that sort of habitat.
Okay.
Okay. Any last ones on habitat? Okay, in that case, we will do the same sort of thing with recording birds. So bearing in mind that we're going to look at the transect maps in the online system in just a moment. But are there any points you wanted to ask about the actual process of logging your encounters with birds as you walked along your transect? So I can't. Nobody's flinching at the moment. Oh, okay, Virginia.
I'm not sure if this is the right question for here, but I just went to a local area I know very well, and I walked along, and sometimes I could hear things. I had no idea where they were, so there was no. And because I'm not very good at bird identification, it was really difficult to tell what they were. But the thing I found really difficult was when I got into the wooded bit, there were so many different birds going on, and trying to distinguish between them. And I've been going back home and listening and thinking, well, what was that? And is that just a question of just taking time, because it just felt quite difficult. And what you sound when you listen to it on a kind of online thing and then go and listen to it in the field, it feels quite different. So
yes is the short answer. I think there are two things happening there. One is your ID level, and that will have a bearing on the kind of square where you're going to be able to do a BBS visit. If in a woodland setting you're finding, you're only recognizing, let's say, 10 or 20% of the things that you hear, then I would say you're probably not quite ready to do a BBS square in that sort of habitat. So it might be a case of having a conversation with Nick and seeing if there's something which is maybe a more open habitat where there's the species might be skylark and yellowhammer rather than 3 species of tit, 2 species of warbler, wrens, dunnocks, robins, blackbirds, everything else going off. And then the actual how you sort of locate and record the sounds, I find myself sort of trying to be really strict and have this, I think I mentioned last week, this imaginary, I imagine myself as an imaginary crop spreader, with those giant booms. I don't actually do that because obviously I need my hands here to hold my clipboard, but in my head I've got my arms out and I'm kind of going, I'm trying to sort of keep my ears on those same lines. It's easier with eyes than ears, but it's easy to look over there and say that's where I've got to. But it's a bit more difficult with ears to pinpoint sound and say that sound is level with me or just behind me or what have you. But you get used to it. And the other sort of element to that is, and the ID will have a bearing on this too, but if you are able to keep moving even at a slowish pace, then it becomes a bit easier to work out where the birds are in relation to you as you move along your transect. If you spend too long in one place, the birds will start, ultimately you'll get some bird movement adding to the complication. So if you possibly can move along, you might have to stop every now and again if you've got a flock of birds or there is something that requires a bit more attention. But if you can possibly get into the habit of making sure you're moving slowly but surely through along the transect, that will help a little bit with that issue as well. Adrian.
Yeah, so I did a practice one where I was walking along, and like there was a red kite in front of me, and I kept basically pushing it as I was walking along, so it was always ahead of me. And it happened with a few other birds, you know, off to the, especially in a large, you know, open field, so sort of flushing them forward and forward. So would I not record those because they never appeared on my wings?
It's a very good question, Adrian, and one that basically we all, the assumptions of let's just say a lot of surveys of all sorts of different taxa, one of the key assumptions is often that the human being doing the surveying is having no impact on the organisms that they are surveying. Of course, the reality is the human being is very often, if not always, having some impact on the organisms they are surveying. And the answer really in this case is, again, it's a kind of judgment thing. So if you sort of imagine your 1 kilometer, let's say you've got a nice straight 1 kilometer line on slightly up rising ground, so you can see the whole transect, and a red kite is low over the habitat in front of you in your first, let's say it's in your first 200 meter section, but as you walk along, you push it into the second one and so on. That ought, and ultimately you push it out of the 1K altogether. The way I would be recording that within my first transect, but then I would, the trick there, or the important thing there, is not to then record it in the second and the third, sorry, when I say transect, I mean 200 meter section of transect. So don't record it in the first one and the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth. You know, record it once if it is in your 200 meters when you are, and you are fairly confident that it is your movement that has pushed it out. It becomes more difficult when the birds are moving of their own, well, they're moving of their own volition anyway, but if they're moving around and you're fairly sure it's not to do with you, you know, if they're quite distant and they just happen to be moving around anyway, then I would try to be more strict about the imaginary booms, and then only things that you pass. The other thing to be aware of in terms of the analysis and what the information is trying to show, a bird that's flying and spending most of the time on the wing, it's never going to go into a distance band anyway, because it's going to be whichever distance band you saw it in, it's going to be marked as flying, which is analyzed in a slightly different way to a bird that's sort of stationary singing in a bush over there, which means you've got a little bit more, you can be a little bit less sort of tied down with the way you record these things. But yeah, if you know you're pushing it, I would record it in the first transect section in which I saw it. But if it's not being affected by me, I wouldn't record it until it, you know, I passed it or it passed me. Any other bird encounter type questions?
Nick Tess has asked a question in the chat about what best time to start the survey in the morning. And I guess the supplementary, sorry, from Susie, which is kind of linked, so I'll ask it now, and a suggested time limit to walk a transect as well. So I guess when to start and how long would you be out for? So
starting is, I think this is in the instructions somewhere. I could read it and check if I'm right, but I'm gonna say not bang on dawn, because there's birds leaving roost and you don't want everything to be going to and fro. So I think the normal advice is an hour from first light is the best time to start. So you've got over that initial birds moving to and from, and things are kind of settled in. And if they're going to be singing, they're sat in their territory singing. There isn't a suggested time limit to walk a transect because it will vary hugely depending on the nature of the habitat. If you've got a pretty rubbish let's say an upland square, a moorland square, if you took 15 minutes to walk, well, okay, 15 minutes might be a bit quick, 20 minutes to walk that 1 kilometre over flat moorland versus 40 minutes, all that you're going to do if you spend 40 minutes doing it is hear the same meadow pipits singing for longer. You're probably not going to detect anything different. So you'd be okay to move probably no quicker than 20 minutes, but you wouldn't need to spend much longer than that either in an open, uniform, flat habitat. If you're in woodland, I would say you need to take a bit longer than 20, certainly longer than 20 minutes to walk through a 1 kilometre section of woodland, because you're going to be, first of all, you're going to be encountering things much more often, a bigger range of species, and therefore more manual work recording those detections. So there isn't a maximum, but I would be personally, I'd be wanting to, I'd be feeling like I ought to be finishing a transect within kind of 45 minutes, simply because if it takes a lot longer than that, it tends to suggest you're moving so you might be moving so slowly that the birds will be moving, and therefore the chance of double encounters is increased. So, I mean, it could be a bit longer than that if necessary, but I wouldn't. Yeah, I'd think sort of 45 minutes would be a sort of a good mid to upper limit, let's say. But if it takes 50, 55 for a particular transect because there's so much going on, yeah, so be it. Nick, have you got any thoughts on that? Because you've got a BB, you're a BBS.
Yeah, mine. I guess my take. It's different when you're first starting out to when you've done it for a while. So my take, what my transects take about exactly to say 40, 45 minutes plus or minus. There's a little bit of walk in between to get from 5 to 6. So it's probably about that kind of time. But I guess my take is, so long as I'm consistent every year in what I do, that's probably the more important bit. That's my kind of framework, I guess. So as long as every year I'm 40, 45 minutes and I'm not an hour one year and half an hour the next one, might take them. That may not be the right answer, but that's probably.
No, it's a very good answer, in that consistency is key. Obviously, if you're new to the square and or newer to bird identification, then as your skills improve and your familiarity with the square improves, your efficiency will improve as well. So actually, you might take an hour the first year and 55 minutes the next year, but be equally be consistent in your recording, just because it didn't take you quite as long to know what code to write down and how to mark it on the sheet, and to where the end of your first section was and your second section, so on. Whereas the first year you might have had to stop for a few more seconds and go, okay, well, I think I'm there now, and all that kind of thing. So there will be minor improvements in efficiency, which would mean it would be okay to be, when you first start out, to be a little bit quicker the next year and the next year after that. But once you get familiar with the site, as Nick says, it should be more or less the same each time.
Yeah, one question, it could be interesting to get your thoughts on this. I was chatting to our regional organiser the other day actually about when, so the window for the visits, 1st of April through to mid-May, isn't it? I think. If you go on the 1st of April, obviously there's a lot of birds won't be back yet. They won't be on territory. If you leave it to the middle of May, you may miss. Have you got a steer as to when in that window you probably?
Again, the key thing is consistency. So same each year. If you're really fastidious about this, like I am, then I went through, because my square was done many years before I did it. I actually worked out the average date over about 10 different years and I now try and go within a day or two of that. But okay, that might be a bit silly. The reason there's a window of 6 weeks from beginning of April to the middle of May is really two things. One, because it gives people more flexibility. People might have different commitments and so on at different points during the year, but also because of the variation from north to south. If you've got a BBS square in the uplands on Cairngorm, you might not even be able to get there on the 1st of April. So you know, going in on the 1st of May makes much more sense. So choose something that is going to be hopefully a weekend or part of the month that's going to be that you don't anticipate being busy in future years. So if you've got kids and school holidays to think about, for example, you might want to push it a bit later so it doesn't get hit by Easter holidays, that sort of thing. But then the message is just make sure you try and do it within a couple of days of that each year, and don't make it sort of 1st of April one year, 3rd of April next year, 5th next year, 7th next year, 9th next year. It shouldn't advance. It should stay. When I say within a couple of days, it means if you do it on the 1st of April, you know, the 5th of April this year, and you can either do it up to the 7th or as early as the 3rd the following year, but don't go outside that window.
And just one other question, Nick, around counting young birds. So I know it's probably more relevant for a second visit, for the later visit when you've got newly fledged young, or in my case last year I had a whole field full of rooks, and I hadn't quite realised actually. I counted them all and then spoke to the RO that you're actually trying to separate them, not count the younger birds and cygnets and swans, that kind of thing. What's the
that's right. So BBS is adult. It is a count of adult birds, which means that, and like Nick says, second visit is where this is going to be most relevant, particularly if you do a sort of April 1st visit. But you should not count birds that you've definitely identified as juvenile. So that means your all yellow-faced blue tits and great tits don't get counted because they're birds of the year. Young water birds that are clearly, you know, chicks or half grown or anything like that, anything that's not visibly not an adult, you would not count. Of course, if you hear something and it's not an obvious begging call, if it sounds like an adult, you can count it as an adult. If it's an obvious cheep or, you know, begging type call, a young bird calling to its parents, don't count that. But if you don't see the bird and it sounds like a normal call of a wren or a normal call of a robin, then just assume it's an adult. But if you see it and you know it's a young bird, leave it out. Okay, I think what we'll do now is we'll take a quick look at the website. So there's two reasons for doing this, really. First of all, just so that you, when you get there yourself, you are familiar with it and you can find your way to the various resources, but also so just to sort of debunk any myths about how scary any of the elements of doing any of these things are, so the transect mapping and so on. So can you see my website, my browser at the moment with a big COVID banner on it?
Yep, got you, Nick. Yep.
Oh, we've got Jack. Just mute Jack there. Getting that problem again. That's okay. Good. So I'll show you some of the logged in things first. So the things where you don't need to be registered, but where you can find extra information. And I won't spend long on this at all, but over here on the left hand, first thing I should say is if you come to the BTO website, the easiest way to get to anything from bto.org, our homepage, certainly if it's to do with one of the projects, is to go to project at the top, and then you'll see Breeding Bird Survey and that handy drop down, and that takes you through to this page. So that's I find the easiest way to navigate to anything you want. Go to project and then pick the one you want. Then all the kind of things that I've been referring to, like the habitat recording sheet, the field recording sheets, all that kind of stuff are under the taking part menu, and all those downloadable, printable, instruction-y type things that we've already been looking at, some of which I sent you, but not all of which I sent you because I didn't want to overload you, but they are all to be found under download forms and instructions. I've got a message here saying your screen sharing is paused. Is it still working when I scroll up and down?
No, it's not working.
Right, let me do a new share. give it a kick and see if that sorts it. How about now?
Yeah, good.
Don't know why it did that. Sorry about that. So yeah, taking part, and then these download forms and instructions are where you can get all those things I've been talking to you about. And it's basically just a list, and it does what it says on the tin. I'm not going to open any of these. But if, for example, you wanted to do some more of those fun detection type quizzes that we were doing last week as polls, you can find them all there. Species codes if you want a crib sheet for them, all the recording forms, etc. Oh, and of course, not forgetting the full instructions. So if you don't believe what I'm saying, or you want to check anything, that's the place to go. The other really useful, or another really useful page, is the one that we're going to come to. It's the one that we're going to come to now, because it tells us about the online bit of the system. So BBS Online tells you how to get set up. There's some guidance document. Crucially, there are 2 videos. One all about mapping and editing your route, which we'll come to in a moment. Secondly, entering and editing data. But for now, we're going to say we've just landed on the BBS page. We're all set up. We're already registered. And I want to show you what it looks like in the logged in bits. So the places where you would actually do some of these actions. So you go to data entry. It asks you to put in your BTO username and password. I've already done that, so it's come straight in for me. This is the data homepage that any surveyor will see. And the mapping is the thing that we've sort of touched on the most, but haven't actually looked at yet. So I'm going to show you my route and some of the nice tools that you can see on these. So first of all, I will just show you a setup square. So this is a square that's already been set up. If you go to map settings on here, you get to do all sorts of different things. So you can fade out the background. You can change the colors of the lines, the endpoints, the markers. Any one of these you can pick from a myriad of colors. So if you're colorblind, or you find some colors easier to see than others, all that kind of thing, that's all possible. You can change the background to an Ordnance Survey map. You can have 2 maps alongside each other. So I just closed the map settings there, and now you can see, this is the Google map satellite image. This is your OS at 1 to 25,000. And the one that I really like about all this is you can add the distance bands. So I've just clicked 25 there, and if you zoom in, I can now see so on my square, section 3 is a good example. If I'm walking along this section of the first transect, I know from these distance bands on the aerial view that if I'm on this track here, anything in the wood is more than 25 meters away from me. Anything in these bushes and trees more than 25 meters. Anything in these bushes and trees just alongside the track, well, yeah, of course, they're within 25, but that's really handy for working these things out. And then if you put the 100 on as well, so if I hear a chaffinch that sounds like it's on the kind of front edge of the wood, I know it's more than 25 meters away, but it's probably not more than 100. And if you think back to what I was saying about wrens and goldcrests and so on, wren might be audible from the back edge of this wood, but a goldcrest probably wouldn't. So these things can be, if you toggle these on and off and have a look at what's underneath, they can be really helpful for helping you get your head around your transect and those distance bands within it. So yeah, nice features there. Once you've got the maps set up as you want in a way that you find easy to understand and follow, for me, that is one map of the satellite here, the satellite view of the whole lot. Then you can save that view or print it to take with you into the field. What I usually do personally is I screen grab it on my smartphone, so I can just refer to it if I want without having an extra bit of paper. But if you want to print it, you can do that there, and it's really nice. You can also do, if you're in an area with no features at all, so if you're doing an upland area, or I say no features, fewer features, you can actually have you can actually download the grid references for each section, so you can follow it on a sat nav, and you can add notes for particular transects if you want to, but there's no need to do that. It's just there if you want to. When it comes to actually plotting a route, first thing to say is you will get this message which gives you some instructions, and do read through this because it's got not necessarily now, but when you come to plotting a route online, it's got some important things to say. So basically, once you've set the route up, you need to follow the same route each time. So make sure it's, you know, accurate and works. And a few other bits of information that you need to look at. Now, of course, I've plotted mine already here. So what I'm going to do, instead of messing around with my own one, which would give me all sorts of palpitations, I'm going to come all the way back out again, and I'm just going to show you the video which tells you exactly how to do that. And I won't play all of this because you can watch it in your own time. Just get myself to the right page. But just the bit about drawing a route. So now I might need to do yet another. I bet you can't hear the sound, can you? No, that's because I did the classic not sharing the sound. Here we go. Share computer sound. And I'm going to take it to the bit where Sarah talks about actually plotting a route.
And here we have a BBS square, so we'll be drawing two.
Can you hear that okay?
Lines,
It's a bit quiet.
200-metre sectors. For the Waterways Breeding Bird Survey, you would draw a route along a waterway using the primary map, which you can get from BTO HQ, and you'll be drawing between 1 and 10 500-metre sectors along that waterway. But for now, we'll draw a route for BBS, and it's the same setup for WBBS routes. To start drawing the transect, click on the map, and then click again everywhere you wish to make a turn. We'll be trying to keep these transect lines as straight as possible. And I'm checking over here for the length of the transect. I want this to be 1 kilometre for this transect section. So once I've reached the 1 kilometre mark, I double click to finish that transect. We'll then need to add the second transect route. Again, click once, drag, click at every turn until you reach that 1 kilometre mark. Then you'll double click and create that second transect. Now it's worth at this point just adding the distance bands to the transect, just to make sure there's absolutely no overlap and you've avoided any right angles along the transect line as well.
So a good point there that I just wanted to draw to your attention. We mentioned the fact that the transects must be more than 200 meters apart, so that there are no overlaps with your wider distance, your 100-meter distance band. So that's what Sarah's talking about here. And she also said something new there, which is, or that we didn't mention before, which is important, which is there shouldn't be any right angles in your transect route. And the reason for that is, if you think about a right angle and the way the distance bands work, then you could end up, as you turn, if you turned a corner that sharply, recording things in the same bird in 2 different sectors. So that's why you shouldn't have any right angles in it. You'll also see that there was no obvious sort of access route for this first for Transect 1 that comes down here, the one that Sarah did first. So she's basically gone along this woodland boundary and field boundary, but it would require, that one would require seeking access permission. This one probably too, because actually the first start of this track is not a public bridleway. It's only later on, I think, that it becomes a bridleway. But at least this one does follow an existing route. I mean, she could have gone straight up like that, but then you'd have been, walking. I think it's a bit like Tessa's actually, walking along if you did it in a straight line, you'd have to drop down this steep-sided gully here into Lavender Dale, which wouldn't really be very sensible. So starting in the dale itself and following that track, even though it means the line isn't perfectly straight, is a much more sensible option for the route.
Well, as this can cause double counting the inside corner of any right angles. From here, you can either cancel the edit or you can save the changes. And your map has been drawn online.
So that's it for plotting a Transect route. It's actually, hopefully, fairly simple. So you're just clicking and dragging a line along the route that you want to create, and then once you're happy with it, clicking save. Using the distance band, toggling them on and off just to check there's no overlaps and no right angles. But yeah, once you're happy with that, click it, and then off it goes into the system. You can always edit it if you before you do your first survey. But once you've surveyed it the first time, then it should stay the same each time going forward. The only exceptions to this, and you'd need to talk to Nick about doing this, is if there's a change which means you can that bit of the section, the Transect no longer exists for some reason. So or is if a building has been built right on the Transect line, you're not going to be able to, you're not going to walk through the building anymore. You're going to have to edit the route to get around that building. Or if the access changes in such a way that means you physically can't get along one section, that would be the only reason to alter the route. But you should do that in discussion with the organizer.
Can I just come in a couple of bits on that while we're at this point? So on this, because all the squares are new, or with the exception of Dean, like yours last year, all the squares are new. In other words, you may be handed over a route from someone else who's done it previously. Because they're all new, it's quite a bit of setup time. So please give me a shout, and I'm speaking to a few of you on this. I can get in from the other end, my end as well, and help with edits if it gets a bit complicated, if you want to work it through. And then when you've put your routes on, it pings to me to approve it as well. Not that I'm the Transect police, but so if there's anything there, I can spot and say, I know, how about this, or maybe suggest a different route. So don't sit there and struggle and panic on it. Even practical things like clicking the right buttons, just give me a ring and we can do it over the phone, or I can offer some suggestions on that front. And if anybody's doing the wider countryside butterfly survey as well with us, then it'll work. Essentially, your distance categories will be different. But it's just use exactly your same Transect routes, because the methodology works on exactly the same principle. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel for your route. So the same route that you saw Sarah plot on the square there on the video will be the same one, although your distance categories are different. So I guess there are a number of you that are doing butterflies and birds. So you only have to do it once for the two surveys. That makes sense.
Great, thanks, Nick. We've got to 8 o'clock. I do still want to show you the data entry bit for BBS, but I think before we do that, let's have a short break, stretch the legs, quick nip to the loo. So what we'll do in the second part is I'll show you, I won't play the video this time, I'll actually show you what data entry looks like direct in the online system, run through a couple of things that can help improve, that you can use to help improve your ID if you want to do that, and then there'll be another opportunity at the end to ask questions. But right now, let's have a short break. If we come back at 7 minutes past 8, that'd be great. Right, let's have a quick look at the data entry bit. So this is the kind of last bit of the website I said we'd have a look at. And there it is. So hopefully you can see we're back on the data homepage now, a logged in BBS user. We've looked at the route, got all that set up. And we're going to go and enter some data. So it's all sort of big, nice, easy, clicky buttons. You've got a Recce data button here, which allows you to put habitat information in. So this is where you put your habitat details in. Because I've done this square before, I don't need to do that every year. So, you know, I don't need to go to that square, but if you haven't done it before, that's where you would do that. And then these numbers 1 to 10 are the 10 transect sections from your 2 1 kilometer transects. So the first 5 is the first one, the second 5 is the second one. And for each one of the early visit, you click the plus button, date, time, all self-explanatory stuff. You may remember last week when we were looking at the form, I'd scribbled some notes to myself because I never remember these. But so I put, oh, I thought the cloud cover was about 70%. And then, of course, when I come to put it in online, it tells me that 70% would be a 3. Similarly with rain, wind, all it needs is calm, light, breezy. So in this case, because it's because I didn't put the Recce visit in, it's actually asking me to do this, but I'm not going to do the habitat details at this point. I'm going to just demonstrate how I would actually enter species information. You'll note up here that I've put record detection type, and that means throughout my my surveys, I will be saying whether it was visual, song, or call that drew my attention to the bird. And then it's simply a case of sticking the bird names in. So let's say chaffinch first. And it was within 25 meters of me, and I heard it singing. And then there's a count. And if you are somebody who likes using the tab key to scroll, to move between boxes, so that's what I'm doing now, that's just tabbing me across the screen, then that can save time. If you know your 2-letter codes, you can save time there. So blue tit, all I typed in was BT, and it immediately populated that row. So you don't necessarily have to use your mouse and cursor all the time. So let's say a blue tit flew across in front of me and I saw it. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Totally crashed out. That wasn't very clever. Oh, I just opened a new tab. That's all right. And there was one of those, and so on and so forth for your first sector. Most of the time on my square, I might have 8, 9, sometimes low teens of encounters with birds within a 200-meter section. If it's really busy, I might have to add some more rows. It's rare that I have to add more than, have more than 25 in a section, but this will very much depend on what sort of square you've got. You can copy rows, you can copy a row down. So that's copied chaffinch down there. So the reason why you might want to do this is if you have recorded on your sheet, blue tit 1 flew across in front of me, then I walked a bit and I saw a blue tit within 25 meters of me, and then another blue tit. You can amalgamate all those first and then enter them, but the system is set up so that you don't have to do any pre-processing of the data. It should be so that you can just add it straight off your sheet into the system. So that's why there are these various shortcuts really to help you to do that. That's why you can copy rows down and that kind of thing. So do not feel like you have to process the data before inputting it online. As long as it's, if it's written on your sheet, you should just be able to put it straight in to the online system. Similar thing for mammals. What do I see on my square? I see rabbits generally. With mammals, and again, there's a yes, no. So if you're not willing to record, not able to record mammals, not willing to record mammals, you can put that to no, and you won't be asked this information anyway. But I do record mammals, and then you've got a count of actual ones, and then for mammals, you've also got dead field signs like piles of rabbit poo. Local knowledge, you met a gamekeeper and said there's always a dozen rabbits here. I can't believe you haven't seen one. Or seen on additional visits. So if you come back, if you saw it on your on a habitat recording visit or something like that, you can put the information in that way. For me, 99.9% of my rabbits, at least, are ones that I saw whilst I was there. And then you simply submit that transect section, and that is it. So I will crash out of that. What would then happen is that this plus button would then turn to a nice green tick. If you're wondering about colonies, so there's a slightly different process for colonial species, and you can see the colonial species here. A lot of them aren't going to apply to Buckinghamshire, certainly not that first lot. But when you get down the bottom here, you have got a few things that might be relevant. So jackdaw, rook, San Martin house sparrow, maybe even you've got a heronry. And you'll see here there's a number of apparently occupied nests. So, and the information at the top there is worth reiterating. All adult birds need to be recorded by the transect section in the normal way, so count distance bands, etc. This is just for the number of apparently occupied nests. In this case for rook, let's say there were 7 in this rookery. So that's what this additional bit is on colonial nesting birds. And again, once you're happy with that, submit colony records, and in it goes. And that then would go to a green tick as well. And that, for bird data entry, is probably all I want to say, other than to flag up that if you're not sure about this, you want to have another look through somebody doing it at a bit slower pace, who's actually the national organizer of the scheme. Go to Taking Part, go to BBS Online, and we watched a bit of the first video. The second video is all about entering and editing data, so that will give you a much more comprehensive overview if you want a refresher on that.
Can I just add a couple of bits on it, because you won't be able to go through it without saving, but at every stage when you save a transect or you save your entire records, you get presented almost an "Are you sure" screen. So it presents back what you've said, and it gives you your count of blackbirds or blue tits. So if you've typed it in wrong and you've put yellow-browed warbler instead of yellowhammer, you've got the option to go back and say, oops, typing error. You can go back in before it finally gets submitted. And then,
very good point.
Second layer to that, when the data comes in, I get notified when you've completed it. So, and again, I have to go through and say, yep, accept the data. I can't remember exactly what it's called now, but I accept it as. So if there's anything now that I spot, or did you really mean to get 350, whatever, yellowhammers on a field when you typed in 35? There's another layer of, I guess, of validation there. So I might give you a call to say, was that a bit of a typo, or were you really sure it's 350, just as an extra level of security, really, not that we're record police, just to make sure that it goes in. So there's a couple of layers before it gets submitted in. And I can edit things from my end as well. So any issues, any questions, any queries, just give me a ring and I can pick up the phone, or we can do it over the phone if you're not sure first time round.
Great, thanks, Nick. We have got a section at the end for question and answers. So I think what I'm going to do is, if there are questions on data entry in particular, we'll pick those up then, just in the interest of time, and those who want to see this next bit but maybe don't want to stay right through till the end. So the other bit I was going to do before we have a Q&A is just to give you a couple of pointers if you want to brush up on ID. Before I do that, before I show you those tools, I just wanted to ask you another question, and that is about, if you had a go at the 10-minute point count, how did you get on? So when you were doing those point counts, what proportion of the sounds did you identify bird sounds? Nearly all of them, more than half, less than half. I didn't have time to try. This is the one where you had the circle, and the idea was you kind of sat or stood in the middle. Well, you sat or stood somewhere and then mapped where the birds were vocalizing in relation to you. And if you remember when we were framing this, one of the things that I said was it's not supposed to be something you do once and think, oh no, I could only get, you know, I didn't identify any of them, let's say, but rather something that if you do repeatedly and date each one, then you've actually got some reference to go back to. And hopefully over time, if you are just building up your skills, then you might see progression, or you might see the same call even in the same place is repeatedly, you know, got a question mark, and then you might say to yourself, okay, I need to definitely work out what that one is, because it's bugged me the last 3 times I've done it, particularly if you do it, say, frequently enough that, you know, maybe once a week or once a fortnight, that the same birds are vocalizing in pretty much the same place, which territorial birds will tend to do. So quite an interesting spread there, actually. Pretty much a neat split down the middle with 4 or 5 people in every category. So those people that had a go of it, quarter of you, sorry, yeah, five people got nearly all of them, or all of them. I should have put that as an option. 5 of you got more than half of them, which is great, and 5 of you less than half of them, which is also, you know, that's if you got any, if you were able to identify anything, that's a great starting point. What I want to do now is give you a couple of tips for things that you can do, hopefully to potentially to help. Now, listening to online recordings is a way of helping you to learn sounds of the common species, and Zenocanto is a free website with loads and loads of recordings that can help you to do this. However, it does have over 10,000 species and hundreds of thousands of recordings, so you do need to work out how to find your way around this. And the way to do that is if you use this advanced search button at the top, rather than just diving straight in and searching recordings. And let's say you want to listen to blackbird. Now, straight away, you'll see there's a lot of blackbirds globally. So let's pull back on that and say, we want common blackbird. If you're not sure of the full English name, then maybe dip into your field guide and find the scientific name, and that'll get you to it quicker. We only want the song, so we can put in sound type song, and you're still going to have a lot for a common species like blackbird. So let's narrow this down further and go for blackbirds singing in the, no, not dead of night, in the United Kingdom. And that's still probably going to be quite a lot of recordings, but at least now we've narrowed it down. And the other thing about narrowing it down to the United Kingdom, so you see we've still got 850 results. But the other thing about narrowing it down to the United Kingdom is we know now we're not, if the birds have different dialects in different parts of their range, which many species do, now we're going to be hearing the ones that are the right sounds for the part of the world we live in. And then the next thing, when you're presented with this list of recordings, the next thing to look at is this column here, which shows you what the sound recordist reckoned in terms of quality. And my suggestion to you is stick with the A quality recordings, because the other one, if you get to B or C or further down, there's going to be lots of background noise. It's going to be much harder to hear. And then it's simply just a case of clicking play and enjoying the wonderful sounds of a blackbird. If you click the link to the recording itself, so over here you've got the recording itself, you get much more information. You also get to see a spectrogram or sonogram, which is a way of visualizing the sound. If that's helpful for you, you can more easily move through the recording. And if there are other species calling away in the background, some recordists have actually put those in. This one says background none. I did actually hear a robin ticking when we were playing that, so this recordist hasn't put it in. But often if there's 2 or 3 obvious things singing or calling on the same recording, it will actually have that under background, which can be really useful to help you sort of piece together the different sounds you're hearing. Some of the recordings are really clean and there's very little else calling or singing. I mean, I did hear a robin ticking here, but there's not much else judging by that sonogram there. Other recordings have 2 or 3 things all sort of shouting away at the same time, so it can be quite useful to see what's there. So that's Seno Canto, advanced search, species, the type of sound you want to listen to, and then the narrow it down to the United Kingdom so you know you're listening to UK dialect. What that's not so good for is if you hear a sound that you don't recognize immediately. So how are you going to narrow it down? If you've got an idea, if you think, oh, that's a thrush, sounds like one of the thrush family, it's a nice sort of rich, fluty sort of sound, then you could come in here and try song thrush, mistle thrush, and blackbird, do it like that. The other things you can do is try and describe the sound, and this takes a bit of practice, but actually maybe even write it down or say to yourself or try and repeat it, and then go and either look it up in a book. Sometimes it will actually, what they've written might actually make you think, oh yeah, that was a harsh rasping sound. It could well have been a J or whatever. Other times that's more difficult, and a better approach might be to actually record the sound. So if you've got a smartphone, it's quite easy to get an audio recording on the phone and then come back and listen to it at home. And there are some apps. The best one is BirdNet, I think it's called, that will give you some suggestions. But if you're using apps to identify the birds, I would caveat that by saying they're not always right by any means, particularly the bird sound ones. There's some pretty good photo ID ones. One called Merlin, which is great, still gets some stuff wrong, but the sound ones do struggle a bit. So don't assume it's right. You need to go into it with an open mind. And the second thing is, if you're finding yourself needing to use an app quite a lot to identify birds, then probably you're in a BBS square that's maybe a bit complex for your level at the moment. So it'd be a case of maybe coming back to that one in a future year and chatting to Nick about the best way forward there. If you want to test yourself a little bit and listen to different sounds, or indeed look at pictures of birds and test your ID, there's a fabulous website called on the Nord University web pages. They're bird ID quizzes, which allow you to do this. So I'll just show you how to set this up. It'll ask you to register. It's free. By having a profile, it just means you can see how you've got on each time you've done it. And if you're a competitive type, you can enter your name in league tables. If you're not, you don't have to, or you can just put, ABC 1, 2, 3 and leave it at that. But it asks you to create a profile so that you can track your own progress. So if you go to a sound exercise, once again, a bit like Seno Canto, narrow it down to United Kingdom unless you really want to put yourself to the test and do all the bird song and call in the Western Palearctic. Don't go in that, leave it in exam mode no. If we start with a level 1, small number of questions, we don't want to give ourselves a time limit, but we do want alternatives, and then click start. Anybody recognize that from the list of options? You can go 1 for feral pigeon, 2 for collar dove, 3 for stock dove, 4 for turtle dove, 5 for wood pigeon, if you like. Michael, Dean, Adrian, sorry, Marique. I probably pronounced that wrong. Susie, all saying 5. So you then click 5. Answer has gone green. We've scored 1 for wood pigeon. Great stuff. Feel free to hold fingers up to the screen for this one. Lynette's first out of the blocks with Cuckoo. So this one's a bit of a tricky one because it's a call rather than the song. It's also tricky because occasionally they throw in species that would not be common in the UK, like red-throated pipit. I can assure you it's not one of those. The other thing that's slightly tricky is because they're using the nominate of these species. So we have pied wagtail, which is actually a subspecies of white wagtail. So Susie's going for white wagtail, as is Jeremy. Let's see if they got it right. And so they did. Very good stuff. You see how this works. A tentative 1 from Dean. Anybody going for anything different to 1? Jeremy, yeah, a few ones, okay. And very good indeed. So nice and clear, that a nicely clearly demarcated, although very fast teacher, that one. A colt, it would sound more slurry. It's not a very good recording, this one. It's a bit distorted, unfortunately. Yeah, I think Jeremy and Susie are there with that one. I think we've had this already. Sometimes this happens as well, where they throw in one you've had already, so that makes it nice and easy. Oh. You'd have thought a United fan wouldn't have been tripped up by that. Collar doves say United, United. Yeah, all sorts of weird sounds going on there. Chattering and other crazy noises. Susie and Jeremy reckon this sounds like a dovecote, doesn't it? So yeah, feral pigeon. And finally, perfect, 10 out of 10. There we go. Our score was successfully saved. So you've seen how it works. You can spend as little or as much time as you want on these. You can change the levels. If you do the photo quiz, which we won't do the whole of one, but I'll just show you how it works so I can point something else out to you. So again, United Kingdom, no to exam mode. We'll go for an easy one, 10 questions, no time limits, alternatives. You can zoom in on the questions, and these little book things here will actually give you some information with some features about how you ID that species, which you can have a quick look at. And then you go back. Okay, that didn't quite work. Sorry, there we are, back on the back on the quiz itself. So we had a look at missel thrush. Don't think that matches. Have a look at ring ouzel. Okay, it's pointing a few bits and pieces out. Back to our quiz. Yeah, can see those sorts of things. So if you're not sure of the answer when you see the picture, you can use these info buttons to find out some more info before you make your choice. And that's how it works. So it's a really nice little, I mean, it's not foolproof. There are, like I say, every now and again it throws up a really rare species, or it uses the nominate version like white wagtail instead of our pied wagtail. But by and large, it's the best thing out there that we've found for training purposes, for improving your ID or testing your ID skills. And with these nice info things sitting behind it, it can really be quite a nice way to learn. Okay, I shall stop my screen share now and bring up. Sorry, Peter, I didn't have my chat in front of me there, so I can see you were answering away there as well. Very good. You got great tit too. I might have been sucked into thinking that was a cold tit singing. I think if it wasn't for you and Dean and one or two others putting me right. So that's really good. Yeah, I'm not going to say anything else about tips to improve your ID, but those are a few bits and pieces that we've found useful. It does take practice. It does take time. If you're not confident or you think you might be mismatched with the square that you've got at the moment, or a square that you're looking at, speak to Nick about it, and he'll probably be able to give you at least some indication of whether that's a square that's going to have lots of things on it or rather fewer things. Okay, so it's pretty much time for any general questions you might have about BBS methods, data entry, ID, or indeed, how do you set your phone alarm to wake you up with a bird song?